The headline is clear. None of the atrocities that were committed in Gaza will be contained to Gaza or the Palestinians.
That's Noura Erakat, a renowned expert in international law. When I heard about the U.S. attacks on Venezuela and the kidnapping of its president, I immediately called her to ask her how Israel's genocide in Gaza may have set the stage to enable this kind of naked aggression. Hi, Noura. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you, Dina. Great to see you. I was just going to say, I love that it's two Palestinian sisters doing this too. That's it.
I
Okay.
know. They finally got us together.
Noura has been sounding the alarm for years that by failing to protect Palestinian rights, the world has ultimately undermined those same protections everywhere. She even wrote a book about it, and now we're seeing how her predictions are playing out.
So the United States kidnaps a sitting head of state in a sovereign country where there is no controversy over that sovereignty and head of state immunity, and does so by also saying that they're exercising self-defense. Our antenna should immediately go up about the manipulation of the use of self-defense, which fits in a broader US tradition. But to see it being used in this moment so brazenly, with such audacity, also indicates how much the international legal order and legal mechanisms that should prevent this from happening have been eroded. And that was specifically done in the course of the genocide in Gaza. To facilitate the genocide in Gaza, the United States, together with Israel, and those who are complicit, including media corporations, weapons companies, and others who have interests, have gutted international law. The very guardrails set in place to prevent atrocities taken apart in the course of the Gaza war, where all states are acting with impunity, and sets us up, primes us for this moment where the US can brazenly say that now it's brazenly illegal operation of kidnap and aggression is self-defense.
One could argue that there is a very rich history of the US meddling in Latin America and toppling leaders. So, how is this particular moment with Venezuela any different?
What is, I think, unprecedented here is the brazen audacity with how the United States has done it. It is literally, imposed a siege without Security Council authorization, which is, this unilateral imposition is absolutely illegal. It has confiscated oil tankers. It has extrajudicially assassinated fishermen without presenting any evidence and claiming that they are narco terrorists, without, acting as judge, jury, and executioner, and now kidnapped a sitting head of state and commandeered a sovereign country to not only facilitate regime change, but facilitate regime change that suits US interests in front of the entire world. They're setting up the stage to basically say that there is not going to be even, a fake adherence to international law.
If the Gaza genocide marks when international law collapsed, then what should we expect to see next, and who's most at risk?
I would say that the Gaza genocide probably marked, like as you say, the collapse of international law, but that we've seen a steady attack on it since the United States was no longer able to control the United Nations. And we can mark that as the moment where the third world becomes a majority in the UN in the 1970s. What we see in Gaza is the end of this era and the end of the charade. Third world communities are going to be the most at risk in the way that reflects already their existing vulnerabilities in the international legal system. That said, nobody's safe. Nobody's safe. Even those who live within empire, right, are not safe. They are those who can protect themselves might be able to, but almost all of us have been marked as expendable by a ruling elite that doesn't necessarily see us as worthy of life. And really, the United Nations failed, and the international community has failed miserably in Gaza, but that does not mean it needs to fail in this moment. The international community still has the opportunity to hold those who fomented genocide, waged genocide, propagandized for genocide to account. All of that is absolutely necessary for justice for Palestinians, but it's also necessary to protect the rest of the world. These things are interconnected. It makes us all stronger and safer, and it begins by seeing Palestinians as worthy of life and their full spectrum of humanity.
Yeah, that's a good segue into my next question because you're obviously a scholar of international law. So at this point, to what extent do you still believe in it? And what types of meaningful legal accountability do you think are still possible for the US right now in this flagrant violation that it's committed?
We need some sort of international law that can act as a guardrail or at least as a marker of common principles. That is distinct from having faith that the law is a noble function and not a source of oppression, especially for peoples of the global South. And in this, I've never had that fidelity to the law, but I have understood it as a tool, particularly as a tool that we can use against, the oppression from the global North, which has refused to understand that all peoples have equality, dignity, and a right to self-determination. This point, international law is what it's always been. It is as strong as the will exists to implement it.
Very briefly, how do you think Israel is sitting and watching all of this unfold?
Well, Israel was among a minority of states, along with Argentina, that applauded the United States. I think for them, if might makes right, that could not be the better outcome. That's the best outcome that they can ask for because that's something that they can impose because they have been using that. And so it's not surprising at all that they would support the US's invasion because it basically means that impunity is key, and they too can act with impunity.
What is your call to action to states right now to hold the US accountable for this action in Venezuela?
My call to action in this moment is the same call to action that I've made throughout the genocide in Gaza, that the US is empire, but that the US is not the world. The US is empire, but the US is not the world. And in order to protect the world, it is necessary for these states to consolidate themselves into a bloc against the United States to protect themselves and one another despite their disagreements in order to stem what the US promises for the rest of the world, which is a sure dystopia whereby sovereignty, national sovereignty is chipped away and is meaningless, and in its place, capital sovereignty will prevail.